Family, it's your favorite queer radio personality, Anna DeShawn, and this is another episode of Queer News Live. Family, you already know I'm Anna DeShawn, your favorite queer radio personality, and this is Queer News Live. It's an extension of our weekly podcast where race and sexuality meet politics, culture, and entertainment. You already know how we do it. It's right here on E3 Radio, where we are queer news done right. And today we're excited because we have another special guest. Yo, we've been kicking it, okay? Ever since Pride Month ended, we've been back in full swing on Mondays and Thursdays with special guests, interviews, and news we think you should know about. Yes, the things that don't always make your Instagram feed, your Facebook feed, child, whatever you're looking at feed. The good news very rarely travels fast, or even the news that we should know about. And that's why I love doing what I do. I get to focus on LGBTQ things all day, every day. I get to do follow-up stories. I get to talk about the studies and the research and the data and what's happening and what's impacting us every day. Not just the bad news that happens and the news reports on it, but I get to talk about everything. And today I'm excited because we've got a special guest joining us from Media Matters. So let's welcome Brennan to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
It's great. Thank you so much for joining us today on Queer News Live.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, always good. Always good to have you here. And family, just so y'all have an idea of who Brennan is out here in the world, he is the Deputy Research Director for Special Projects at Media Matters. And I'm going to put up a ticker in a little bit so you all can find out more information specifically about the study and the research they do around LGBTQ folks. But Brennan, tell me and tell the good people about the study that you all just concluded, which, like we were talking before, it's a beautiful compliment into the interview I just completed with Glad and with Raina about their Where We Are in Film study. And with you, we're going to talk about the news and evening news in particular, right?
Yes. I love what you said about talking about the things that don't make your Instagram feed, because I'm going to be talking about some of the things that are not showing on broadcast news, which is where a lot of Americans get their information and their news coverage. So my organization, Media Matters, is the progressive media watchdog, and we are looking out for not only conservative and right-wing misinformation in the news on more obviously right-wing outlets, but also looking at how mainstream media is covering or not covering things and allowing conservative narratives to either sway their coverage or really take the lead. So Media Matters did a study that was looking at evening news broadcast coverage of LGBTQ issues for all of last year, 2025. And we looked at the three major corporate broadcast networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, and PBS as well, looking at their shows like PBS NewsHour, CBS Evening News, ABC World News Tonight, and NBC's Nightly News. And what we found was really, really concerning. So outside of PBS, broadcast evening news is totally failing to cover LGBTQ related stories. And this is at a critical time for them to be covering it, because the LGBTQ community is under onslaught of attacks from the federal government, from the judiciary, and at the state level as well. So another thing that we noticed is not only are major outlets not covering the issues, but outlets aside from PBS are not including trans people in their coverage. So I think that really dovetails nicely with the work that GLAAD is doing, even though a majority of these segments are mentioning terms related to the trans community.
And honestly, at this moment in time, given the state of this country, the administration, and their ethos around LGBTQ folks, and specifically, their ethos around trans folks, it's not really that big of a surprise, is it?
It's not a surprise, but I think when you look at the big picture of how the trans community is being covered, when you have mainstream outlets like ABC, CBS, and NBC not covering these issues, they're letting networks that do cover it a lot, like Fox News, really control the narrative and set what the public thinks is important. Fox News, for instance, spent a lot of Pride Month covering a trans athlete in California. And so people are getting this information just from a right-wing perspective, and also being told that, this state competition is important national news in California, is national news for everyone, while broadcast networks are not talking about the bigger picture, like what's happening in the courts and what's happening in state legislatures. And I think that, especially given that people are living in different states where they may or may not have certain protections, it's really crucial that national media is covering these issues.
I totally agree. And if we leave it to Fox News, child, whoo, my gosh. Talk about a world of trouble. And how do we, in fact, hold these broadcast stations accountable? I mean, at this point, we're in a moment in time where regulation is very low. The ownership of these stations has always been with the 1%. And because of the sheer hatred coming out of the White House as it pertains to LGBTQ folks, our humanity, representation, trans folks, the legislation across the country, nobody wants to be on this radar. And so how do we hold these folks accountable to actually telling the stories, and any story, it sounds like?
I think that's a great question. And I think that leads me to bring up some of the crucial context. And that's that broadcast networks are facing a lot of pressures over the last few years. Not only are they covering a president and an administration that are skilled in media manipulation, but they've had legal and funding pressures, funding challenges, particularly with PBS as the government tries to defund them. And then CBS in particular has been taken over by right-leaning interests that are moving the coverage to the right. And we're seeing this across the board, not just in broadcast networks. We've seen it with the Washington Post as well. And so I think it's hard to really find ways to keep these systems accountable. But I think one thing that we can do is really support a network like PBS and prop up their coverage and share their coverage, because they are doing such a good job. One of the sort of key data points that we found is that across broadcast networks, there was nearly 4 hours of coverage of LGBTQ issues in 2025. And that doesn't sound so bad, because these shows are usually 30 minutes a night. When you drill down into the numbers and look at what networks were covering that, PBS actually aired over 80% of that coverage. So that's about 3 hours and 8 minutes across 67 segments. CBS has obviously had more changes in the last year that were not reflected in the study of 2025. So CBS actually had the second most coverage. They had 28 minutes of coverage across 18 segments. And then ABC only aired 4 minutes across 3 segments, which is pretty pitiful if you ask me.
That is deplorable. 4 minutes?
Yeah.
That is what's a worse word than deplorable? I mean, it's almost media negligence to
absolutely
to refuse to cover a community that has been completely under attack by the right in so many different ways. And even if you choose to avoid covering the political nature of this moment, how could you avoid the LGBT culture and entertainment pieces that are also viable stories? That's wild, Brennan.
Exactly. And I want to point to the fact that they clearly can cover it. We looked at coverage on CBS and NBC, which obviously did not reach a good enough threshold. They weren't covering it enough, but they did have some segments that were really great. So when we looked at the coverage, we were also looking at how many members of the trans community were showing up in segments. And we found that PBS had 10 segments that featured trans or gender nonconforming people or their parents. Obviously, sometimes these people who are being affected are minors. And so I think it's just as effective to bring their parents on. So that's 10 segments on PBS. And then the other networks just totally dropped the ball. CBS and NBC cited trans people or their parents in only one segment each, and ABC completely dropped the ball. But those segments on CBS and NBC were great segments. One illustrated the impact of healthcare bans on a trans youth and their family, and another illustrated the way that military bans have affected service members, and it's talking directly to people who have been affected. So it's clear that they can do quality coverage, but they just have chosen not to prioritize it.
Oh, and let's be very clear. I believe they all have the ability to do quality coverage. We're talking about the best of the best. When we talk about broadcast, weekly, evening news, the producers, the writers, the people who are doing this work are some of the best in the business. That's why they are on these national platforms. There's no doubt in my mind that they can do the work. I just, it's frustrating that probably some of them, maybe most of them, feel pigeonholed to not be able to tell the stories, and at the same time, it's doing such a disservice, right? I think you could probably talk to this too, Brennan. From what I understand to be true is that people who watch Fox News, and not only do they watch it, they obsess over it, and they tend to not watch anything else. And so if in fact they did choose to turn the channel to hear something else, what's frustrating is they not getting the other side of the story, uh, which leads me to continue to want to amplify all of the content creators and independent journalists out here that are choosing to do this work. But even then, we cannot fully counteract the viewership of Fox News with our viewership. I believe the last study I saw was that left wing media would need to create three stories to equate to the one story Fox News might run because of how high their viewership is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And the thing is that people who watch Fox News, you're right, are getting their news primarily from there. And they are also kind of a typical base for that kind of right wing coverage. But a large amount of Americans do only watch broadcast news. You know, they want to only have 30 minutes to tune into the news each night. And so they're turning on ABC World News Tonight or one of these other evening shows, which reach really large audiences. But you're right that the platforms of independent creators are much smaller and much more niche in comparison to the Fox News, but also the broadcast networks, which is why Media Matters does a lot of studies looking at broadcast coverage, especially because they're condensing their top stories of the day into a shorter package than cable news like MS Now or CNN or Fox News, which have a full day of programming and can often cover things a bit more. I think that it's notable, though, that Fox News is really an agenda setter as far as LGBTQ coverage goes, because they will hammer in a story and cover it obsessively, and people will begin to think that those are the key crucial stories because they're not hearing something on broadcast media, which is often talking about bigger things, like a Supreme Court case, for instance. And so I think that it's really important that they are not letting anti-LGBTQ extremists at Fox and otherwise set a narrative.
100%. I totally agree. And tell me, what are the demographics? Have the demographics changed on who was actually watching this evening broadcast news? I mean, I think the last data I saw was people over 55.
I don't have the demographic data right in front of me, but I do know that a lot of people exclusively get their news from either broadcast news or local news.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the real challenge is that that demographic also aligns with the highest demographic that chooses to vote. And that is where things get very dangerous. And that's why I believe Fox News has been able to be so effective. The propaganda, the manipulation, it's so good. It's so believable, right? And it gets drilled into you. You know, in this work, advertising is the big thing. They tell us people need to hear something 7 to 10 times for it to really sink in or to take action. Well, the way in which Fox News programs their work, child, you get it 20 times easily. You could easily get it 30 to 40 times in a week. And if you never change the channel, you are being programmed in such a significant way that you may not even realize. And then you head to the voting booth and vote in alignment with that. And I think that that's what honestly makes it so incredibly dangerous. So tell me, Brennan, how long have y'all been doing this report?
So this report was something that we just did for 2025. We have also in the past done other reports looking at how the media is covering anti-trans violence or other things. My organization and team looks at a lot of different things in our coverage. I think this is similar to what you were saying about Fox News, like drilling something in 20 times. But another recent report we put out was looking at their coverage of Texas Senator candidate James Tallarico. And we found just last month that Fox News ran at least 93 segments that used anti-LGBTQ framing to attack James Tallarico. So they are really like creating a word association. When you hear Tallarico, their audience hears like LGBTQ extremism. They really just hit you over the head with it over and over again. And we found that it was about 2/3 of the network segments that used this kind of framing to attack him. So very rarely are you seeing any coverage on Fox that mentions Tallarico that's not also mentioning some kind of anti-LGBTQ framing.
What's wild is the man ain't queer. Let's just start there. Oh, and what also is wild about that is that they must see him as such a threat. 93 segments leans on obsession. It leans on obsession, and it's so dangerous. I mean, let us not forget, Fox got sued for misinformation. They had to pay millions and tens of millions of dollars for being a negligent news organization, and yet somehow people still see the validity in it.
Yeah, and there's a really strong feedback loop between right-wing media and right-wing think tanks and right-wing politicians. So when Fox News covers something like trans athletes over and over again, then it helps create the support for anti-trans legislation in different states. It creates that as an important issue for different political figures in different states. It is something that, you know, think tanks like Heritage can advise on policy around, but also put out anti-LGBTQ narratives in their own media platforms and then show up on places like Fox to really set that narrative. And I think that's why it's important that not only are we covering LGBTQ issues in these major shows, but we're also including people from the trans community and the LGBTQ community at large when you're covering them. Because not only does it show the personal effects that it has on people, but these people are really credibly able to talk about it from a personal and a policy perspective. And especially when you have, you know, right-wing politicians and right-wing conservative think tank people really pushing this messaging in online and on social media and on Fox News, we really have to make sure that we're getting our information out there as well. I think it's also makes me want to mention some of Media Matters research on non-political shows. So we look also at like non-political online shows and podcasts, particularly sports and comedy shows, which we're finding have are often filtering political messaging to their audiences. So a lot of people don't want to watch the news. They don't want to get political information anymore because, I mean, it bums them out in a lot of ways or it gets them upset. So people will tune into some of these podcasts for comedy and sports, but they're leaving with conservative messaging. That's people like Theo Vaughn or Joe Rogan. And Media Matters found that a majority of these shows are right-leaning. And so I think that's another way that they're getting out their messaging in a very subtle way that is very concerning.
They're well-funded. They are well-funded. They have a communications machine that has been working quite effectively. Hence why we've been in this hellscape for, nearly a decade at this point with Trump. And so, Brennan, tell me why you think doing these reports and producing these studies and releasing them is still so important.
Yeah, I think that it's important to look at how the right is setting the agenda for things. And I think that you can't look at right-wing media in a vacuum. You have to look at how mainstream media is either enabling it or even helping it in ways by either not covering things or adopting some of its messaging. You know, no matter what people say, like there is a new media landscape. It is important to engage in it. It is important to engage in the non-political areas, but people still get information from broadcast news and they still get information from cable news. And where people get information is always going to be critical for us to understand, for us to be able to push back against if it's inadequate, and for us to really hold accountable for, you know, their missteps.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's one of those things where even if you don't do it, millions of others are choosing to do it. And so, it's one of those things. And what I mean by that is, even if you don't watch evening broadcast news, even if you are not maybe listening to NPR, even if you are not watching Fox News, Chile, tens of millions of others are. And the information that they are consuming matters. And when we think about the defunding of a PBS, when we think about the impacts that that has on rural areas in our country, if you live in a big city, you may not feel the impact. It may very, very well feel like business as usual. But what we know to be true is that when cuts happen, it impacts the most marginalized among us. And that is the people who live in these rural areas that really lost out, where radio stations did close that were trying to balance the conversation, where voices were muted. And that to me has always been the goal.
Definitely. And like you said, it's important when you have such a patchwork of protections. Trans kids can play sports in some states and they're banned from them in others. Trans kids can access healthcare in some and can't in others. And I think that is why it's so important for there to be national coverage of these. Obviously, local coverage is very important too, because people trust their local news and they're tuning into it, and they're seeing people in their community directly on it. But a lot of people don't have access to their local news, or their local news outlets are really having funding or staffing issues. And so when we don't have that, and when those are facing issues, then it's important that national media is covering them.
150%. Family, y'all know we be having the tickers rolling, okay? So I want y'all to visit mediamatters.org/LGBT. I added a Q. I added the Q.
There's a Q.
Okay, there's a Q. Okay, at first, family, y'all don't know this, but I added an H, y'all. But it's mediamatters.org/LGBTQ. From there, you can learn more about the work that Media Matters is doing, and then also find the study that we're talking about here. Brennan, anything else you want to tell the good people?
No, I think that covers it. Thank you so much for bringing me on.
Of course. And family, this is what we do here on Queer News Live. We're able to bring you the news, right, that doesn't make your Instagram feed, the things that you should know about, and the work that's happening. It's easy to say, oh, I wish we were doing something. Child, people are doing the work. People are showing up doing the work that they are called to do. And all of it matters, especially research and data. Because when they look back on this time in 40, 50 years, they'll be able to say not only were we here, we were keeping the record. Right. And holding people accountable to not seeing our humanity. So thank you, Brennan, for your work. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you too.
Absolutely. Family, go visit the website, okay? Check out that ticker that I had rolling down there, mediamatters.org/LGBTQ. And as always, Queer News is here. Queer News is here for you, okay? Every Monday, we drop a new episode, 5 or 6 queer news stories I think you should know about at the intersections of race and sexuality, as it pertains to politics, culture, and entertainment. I'm Anna DeShawn, your favorite queer radio personality, and I'll talk to you next week, okay? Peace.